Waddingham, editor of Legal News Wales, and Raise the Bar as we join our first in a new series of virtual talks dedicated to highlighting the challenges facing women at the bar, as well as other women in the legal profession. And our first event tonight focuses on barriers to a diverse profession. This event was recorded earlier this month, and we hope that you can share it far and wide. And we are running a series starting in 2022, and booking for those events will take place soon. Our panel this evening is Trish D'Souza, Solicitor at Capital Law and Chair of the Cardiff and District Law Society BAME and Friends Subcommittee, Crash Wigley, a pupil barrister at Civitas Law Chambers in Cardiff, and we're also joined by the founder of Raise the Bar, Adi Rodriguez, who joins us here this evening. Raise the Bar is a group that aims to promote diversity within the legal profession, celebrate the achievements of women, and educate young people everywhere about life at the bar in Wales. It's the brainchild of University Law graduate Adi Rodriguez. And whether you're considering a career at the bar or already practicing, we hope to provide a forum with Legal News Wales that addresses old and new questions about life as a female barrister and judge. The group is based in Wales but aims to support counsel and bar students across England and Wales. We hope the group can be somewhere where anyone can receive honest advice from other women at the bar and discuss further issues and channels of diversity matters as well, especially in this event this evening. It aims to be a melting pot of ideas and information which are readily shared for the benefit of all. To kickstart our event, I asked Crash Wigley to share with us some of her experiences about life as a pupil barrister and being a trans woman, and to explore some of the issues around diversity in the bar that affect her. So, Crash, over to you.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me tonight. I'm really honoured to be able to take part. I think conversations about diversity is so important in the legal sphere because of the type of work you do, and it's so intimately connected with ideas of justice and equality and people having a fair hearing, and that happens in a context of a really unequal society that we live in, and so these matters are fundamentally important to what we do and what we should aspire to do. From my perspective, so I'm very new, starting off in my legal career. I am a pupil barrister at Civitas. I started as a pupil in September, so I'm just 2 months in, really enjoying it. But my perspective is probably a bit different to some of the other people here. But one of the reasons why I'm interested in these conversations about diversity is because before I came to the bar, I worked as a campaigner for an equality charity. So I worked for Stonewall Cymru, which is a LGBT rights charity. And before doing that, I'd done campaigning at university, and particularly interested in conversations around trans equality and what it might mean for me, sort of making my way as a trans barrister. So yeah, just really honoured to be able to take part. Like, thinking about my background, like I came out when I was in university, so been out as trans for what is that, 8 years now, 8 years, 9 years, nearly a decade, so quite a long time, and it feels like a really, really long time ago for me. And I knew that I was trans for much longer, but I came out at university because that was kind of when you had a bit more freedom to do it. When I was in high school, for example, like it wasn't, I didn't know any students who'd come out in high school, for example, and I think that is an indication of how much things have changed, even in like a very short period of time, like in that period of about a decade. And being trans at the bar is particularly important, I think, in the sense that often there are lots of discussions about trans people's rights at law, like, protections trans people have from discrimination. What is the status of trans people's rights in this country? And in order to have that conversation in the best way, like in a proper way. Like, trans people need to be part of that conversation. You also need trans people who've got legal expertise taking part in that conversation. Like, the trans people's contributions to that conversation shouldn't just be lay contributions. They should be expert contributions as well. Yeah, I'd be keen to get involved in that as part of my practice, I guess, as a lawyer coming forward. But part of the reason why I left behind the world of campaigning as well was because it was like, it's so personal to be working on those things as your day job, you know, working on issues that are not just like your professional responsibility, but that affect you on a personal level. And so I'm also keen for that to just be like a part of my work, rather than all of it. And that was actually a big motivating factor for me to come to the law. Thinking about how issues of diversity have affected my career, like the big disclaimer I'd give personally is I don't really have a legal career at this point, because I'm so new. You know, I did a year on the GDL, I did a year on the bar course, and then I started pupillage, and I'm 2 months in, and that, you know, my experience has been wholly positive so far, like not facing kind of any sort of like grief or discrimination or negativity, like, you know, in connection with anything like being trans or anything else. But one of the things I was really aware of when I was applying for pupillage, for example, or for scholarships, is that because I had this campaigning background and I wanted to talk about my campaigning background as well, not just because that's the chunk of my CV where I was working, but also because, you know, it demonstrates skills in advocacy and communication and all those relevant things if you're interested in being a lawyer. So I knew I couldn't like hide it. I couldn't not make it quite a prominent part of my application forms. And I think that is, you know, when you're looking at LGBT people in general, for some people that might be a choice, but whether it's something they amp up or kind of choose not to talk about, or not to prioritize in applications. But for me, it wasn't. I don't think it's counted against me in any way. I think in some ways it can count for you. And when people have asked me about, you know, advice about pupillage applications or scholarship applications, especially for, you know, aspiring barristers, those big Inns of Court scholarship, like one of the things I do encourage people to think about in general is like the importance of coming across authentically in your applications and in your interviews. And I think there's a lot of pressure because it's such a competitive process. It can feel like there's a pressure sometimes to try and live up to like the image of, you know, a barrister or a lawyer or whoever that you expect someone wants to see. But I think you often come across best in interviews when people can relate to you genuinely, when people can see you as a real human person who's different from the other candidates who've come in, but who knows who they are and knows why they're here. And so I think for me, it was absolutely the right decision not to try and sort of play down the fact that I'd spent 3 years of my life working for an equality charity, and that I was passionate about those issues and would be interested in developing a legal practice on human rights, equality, discrimination issues in general. There are other things that I think I try and have like a sort of count your blessings approach, because I think if you've got any marginalized identity, almost all of us will have some kind of experience of abuse or harassment or violence, and that informs who we are. In some ways it can inhibit us, but I think I also kind of try and think of the strengths or the resources that I can draw on based on some of the experiences that I've had. So one of the things is that I think if you've had experiences of discrimination or marginalization in some sense, it can open your eyes a bit wider to the world that we live in. which is useful. Like sometimes I've heard people talk about, like terms like privilege, which can be, I guess, controversial, but like white privilege, male privilege, etc. But I think one way of thinking about that is that sometimes you don't see a problem because it's not a problem for you. Like you can be oblivious to certain issues that people are facing. Like I think like the sort of recent coverage of like the Sarah Everard murder and issues around like violence against women and sort of street-based harassment violence. Like the amount of men whose reaction to that is just, I can't believe this is something you have to think about. Like it's just like it's completely over their heads that this would be on other people's radars, and that's just like one little example of how, yeah, sort of having a different type of experience, perhaps an experience that means you're less represented in many spheres of the legal world, can make your eyes open a bit wider, and you bring a diversity of perspective that's useful. I think it also brings some skills in like empathy and your ability to relate with people in a way that's quite useful in practice. Like if you've had like first-hand experiences of things like, and I think this from like an LGBT perspective, but think about things like the stigma that can be attached to being LGBT, about especially experiences of discrimination or abuse of some form, like being something that you don't want to talk about, or that you'd only talk about with someone who you trust, who you feel safe discussing things with. I think having a bit of first-hand experience of that probably changes the way you relate to people in a way that can enhance your skills as a lawyer. I had a lot of experience organizing like social groups, like support groups. I did that when I was at university. We set up like a trans student support group, and then I've kind of done similar roles in some other organisations I've been involved in, and I set up a choir for trans people here in Cardiff, which has been good. But I think through that you kind of get skills in dealing with people who perhaps are like nervous or anxious about being in a group or in a new place, maybe have like some feelings of like distrust or particularly vulnerable. Like not everyone, I certainly wouldn't want everyone who's involved in these groups to think that I'm talking about them when I say that. But there is a skill in kind of like, yeah, making people feel welcome, making people feel like they're in a space that where they'll be listened to or they feel safe. And that's important. And then I think the other thing that I draw on from my experience is that, like, through being involved in the past in activism and campaigning, is that you just get a bit of an understanding of the wider social context that the law operates in. And especially like if there are student listeners, I just think that's really useful. Like I think it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking like, to be a lawyer, you have to understand the law, and all my attention should be given to understanding the law better. But actually it's good to like see beyond the law, like see the world that we live in that happens around the law. And if you've got a good sense of that, I think that can be something that actually makes you stand apart if you're paying attention to the wider world that we live in. Yeah, those are some of the things that I've kind of drawn out. And one of the things that I've just really benefited on through this like quite quick process of like career change, doing the law conversion, becoming a lawyer, is just the value of networks, and in particular like meeting other LGBTQ, in my case, like lawyers. I did when I was on the GDL, I did something that's organised by LSE called the LSE Featherstone LGBT Moot, which is like a mooting competition that's specifically on like an issue relating to LGBT law. And then it's really nice social experience, because this was before lockdown, but you'd go for the weekend, you prepare with your partner, but then you do moots over the weekend, but also you just get to meet other people who are like interested in these areas of law or LGBTQ themselves. And that's just, you know, like some of those contacts that I made that weekend I'm still close friends with. And you know, similarly, I know in Cardiff there might be opportunities for people to volunteer at the LGBTQ law clinic that's run at Speakeasy. Yeah, like whenever you've got those opportunities, and you know, even if it's like connections across the UK or further abroad, like whenever you've got those opportunities to make those connections, definitely like reach out and grab them, because what I found is that people recognize that I think it can be a bit tough, like going into these spaces where there's maybe no one like you, or very few people like you, or the people like you are very, very senior, or, you know, just feeling a bit isolated perhaps, or isolated maybe is a strong word, but feeling like you might have some things that you want to talk about and you're worried that perhaps the people who are around you aren't going to understand it in quite the way that you need. So I think those networks, however you get them, however you develop them, whether it's through events like that, mentoring opportunities, or just, you know, messaging people, ask them to go out for a coffee, making friends with people on your course as you're studying, whatever it is, like, yeah, treasure those and make the most of those, because I think those are things that will really see you well.
So something you've touched on it already, Crash, and I know with our next speaker, with Trish, we'll talk about this, because whenever we host or I attend an event or speak about diversity and inclusion, the question often comes into kind of flipping it back to the employers or chambers or organisations that are looking to have a more diverse group of professionals. It's not obviously just not a tick box exercise. It is about having diversity of choice. But one of the things we often talk about is diversity of choice, and particularly in law, you know, we have a hugely diverse society that we want to work with, and so the professionals within any organisation, whether it be a law firm or a barristers' chambers, needs to have that diversity of experience as well as anything else to be able to service the clients that it intends to support. And so you know, everything that you've picked up on, Crash, is incredibly important and very true as well, and pertinent and very observant, I think, and in spite of the fact that you've not had a long career so far at the bar, although I know you will. And Crash, I suppose not everybody will have perhaps the political, the campaigning background that you've had, and may not feel that it's something that they identify, although there isn't something they identify as not kind of first and foremost perhaps on their CV. It might be a side note, for example. And is that something that, you know, in a practical sense, even by working in an office with others, is it as a trans woman, do you feel that were you worried about anything that practically that others might fear if they're going through the process? Is, you know, I mean,
I think, well, as a trans woman, I'm always nervous when you're joining a new group. Like, it's always like an unfamiliar environment. Like, I'd feel that if I was starting any new job, definitely. Whenever you're joining a new organisation, I haven't met before I started at Civitas. I've maybe happened to have seen speak or bumped into maybe a couple of barristers there. Like, in some places you might have done a mini pupillage somewhere, but you're not going to know most people who are at chambers. And so I think that you're bound to have a degree of nervousness. I definitely did. And I think if you're it's like we were talking about before, you know, like problems that other people might experience that you don't see. Like, you might be somebody who moves through the world and just that never crosses your mind that you would have to think about potential issues arising in a new organization, because you've always been welcomed with open arms. But that I didn't take that for granted at all. I mean, I'm very pleased though with the experiences that I've had since joining. But I think it's especially difficult for pupils, right? Because lots of pupils are quite cognizant at the fact that they're in a somewhat like vulnerable, precarious position, because there's always that decision that's looming over your head, like, well, this place could just decide not to take you on. And I think you can feel in that sense of kind of pressure, like not to kick up a fuss, or yeah, and kind of not to raise issues as they arise in case you like create difficulties in the relationship between you and members of chambers. So I don't have any particular good advice. I mean, I'd hope that you would have someone at your chambers that you feel able to confide in, who you can properly trust. You know, there are resources like the pupillage helpline, the Bar Council helplines and stuff, if you actually, you know, want confidential advice. But I think that definitely introduces a degree of uncertainty into things.
A quick question, actually, Crash. You said, you sort of mentioned that you came out as trans when you were in university and you were an adult by then. Did you notice that was there a difference in how you were treated as a trans woman to how you were treated before? That you noticed a big difference between sort of the treatment of genders, or not really?
Yeah, oh, definitely. Like, I mean, definitely. I think, I mean, when I came out as trans at university, it like really turned things upside down. Like, I had not a particularly easy experience, like trying to sort of get the university on board and supportive in like helping me make changes. And then, yeah, I mean, the thing that really changed was kind of the levels of like sort of low to medium level like harassment and abuse you'd get, and most of that was directed at me because I was trans. Like, I think if I was visibly trans woman, visibly trans man, whatever, you'd still face a lot of that abuse. But I mean, it would be stuff like people shouting comments in the street as I walked to a lecture, and that happened on a very regular basis. And then I think as a trans woman, yeah, I mean, everyone's experience is different, but my experience has been like you get a mixture of some of the hassle, which is from people who can tell that you're trans and are hassling you because you're trans. Some of the hassle is just like, you know, like street harassment, like the kind of like general sexual harassment that any woman might get, because you're getting it from people who don't know that you're trans, or who might hassle you anyway, even if they knew that you were trans. And then one of the things that I think is particularly frightening as a trans woman, just looking at the issue of street harassment on its own, is that in some situations you might have a guy who's started hassling you, started harassing you without realizing that you're trans, and then might find out that you're trans. And I think that's when you're particularly vulnerable to things escalating and getting quite scary, like a couple of situations like that. So yeah, I certainly think that as a trans woman you get a lot of like sort of the abuse and discrimination, being patronized, things like that any women can be subject to. But there are extra dynamics that come in.
In terms of support from other professionals, Crash, and not just obviously at the bar, it's a very short-lived experience at the moment, but you've professionally, you've been doing speaking recently, you've been obviously had the career as a campaigner, and also at university. Is there anything that you feel that others can do to help, and also to, you don't have to maybe start the conversation, but to either for you to support others, what is it that you can do and what's important about these kind of events, but equally the profession more widely, is there something that we can do to make it easier? And I think there are certain types of diversity groups where perhaps they're further along in terms of maybe understanding the right narrative, the supportive groups, signposting. I think trans is probably, unfortunately, at the bottom of the pile in that sense. I don't think there's maybe enough history and accumulated wealth of knowledge for people like myself to make sure that we're making it a better place for everybody.
Yeah, well, I think for trans lawyers, I think one of the big issues is just that there are so few of us, and we're not really formally connected at all. So I think I'd really love to see like a bit more investment in professional networks for trans lawyers. I think that'd be really, really useful, not just for people in the professions, but also for people coming into the professions. And yeah, because there aren't lots of us. I mean, there's probably more people kind of like who might come out of the woodwork if the right opportunity presented itself. But yeah, I'd kind of like look at doing it like an England and Wales basis or a UK basis or even bigger. Like I'm in a Facebook group that's like international group for trans lawyers, but it'd be nice to have something that was maybe a bit more tied into to this country. So I think that's really good. And yeah, I would encourage people who are happy to kind of support those efforts, because I think that's almost like the first step. Like how do you decide what a group of people need and what can be done to improve equality for that group, unless that group has kind of an opportunity to kind of come together and talk about the issues you're facing. The other thing that I'd say in general is that, and it's about the point that you made about like not feeling like you don't have the knowledge to like know what the issues are or to know how you can make a difference in a useful way. And I think lawyers in particular actually have a particular responsibility around this, that like we're living in the middle of a moral panic about trans people. And people might be more or less aware of this, but if you start paying attention to how trans people are regularly talked about and depicted in the media, on social media, like that becomes a bit easier to see. There's a huge amount of negativity and hostility that exists around trans people at the moment. And I think lawyers have a particular responsibility to keep a clear head through that and to see through some of this. The main piece of advice I'd give people is that kind of fundamental principle of there's nothing about us without us, that you don't have conversations about marginalized groups of people, you have conversations involving them, with them, led by them. And that principle needs to carry over for trans people, because you know, the trans people like not really represented as journalists in the media, not represented in Parliament or in any of the devolved legislatures, no openly trans people in the Senate, and so you kind of have to seek out trans voices. They're not handed to you on a plate. Yeah, I just always really encourage people to seek out the perspective of trans people, not just from trans lawyers, trans people in general, about what's going on in the country, like what are the issues that are affecting trans people, and what can we do as a society to create a world in which everyone's free to be themselves and nobody faces abuse or discrimination because of who they are.
Oh, thank you very much. Crash, I might come back to you in a minute, but I'd like to bring Trish D'Souza in. Trish is a lawyer with Capital Law and is a member of Cardiff District Law Society, but more importantly, the lead for the subcommittee for its BAME Trans subcommittee. And Trish, I don't know if you've got any reflections or things that you might have picked up on in terms of similarities from yourself listening to Crash. And I've got some questions to ask you, but I wasn't sure if you wanted to say anything in response to some of the things that Crash was picking up on. Sorry.
Yeah, I think Crash raises some really brilliant and eloquent points about how perception of individuals really affects how you're treated in any profession, but particularly in the legal profession. And it's a very, I've been involved in the law for nearly 20 years now, you know, so I'm an old hand in that sense. And I've seen different sort of patterns and vogue of behaviour. And, you know, I certainly qualified in a time when, you know, being an individual wasn't really the done thing. You needed to come into the law, whether you're at the barrister end or at the solicitor end of the profession, to effectively be a workhorse and be your slave to your chargeable hours and make your clients happy and all the rest of it. You know, bringing your whole self to work wasn't really a factor at all. And I don't think it was taught at university level, to law school level, you know, to beyond. And I think what Crash is indicated is that, you know, the wider society impacts on the practice of law. It's not the other way around as much as we think sometimes. You know, it's even though we're the profession that advises everybody about how not to breach people's rights, we often forget about how to do that on a personal one-to-one level. And we do need a lot of internal strategy, support, policies, groups, to allow people to get together and be their whole self, you know, and take the professional hat off, you know, in dealing with clients at the end of the day, and just say, God, I don't think they took me seriously because of X, Y, Z, and, you know, have that safe space, because I think that has been missing in our profession for some time, actually. And I think it's great now we've got so much focus on diversity and wanting to improve things. And we've got lots of things like Crash mentioned, the helplines, there's law care, there's all these other sorts of avenues of support, but I think we still need to go back to basics and start with, well, just ask your colleague how they're feeling, and, you know, were you treated differently today, do you think, and was there a particular reason for that? Do you want to talk about it? Should we go and talk to our supervisor about it? Should we think about not to working with that client again? You know, whatever the issue might be. But it's all about looking at the lawyer as an individual, because I think for a long time we haven't been. We've just been the workhorse to, you know, churn out the legal advice and all the rest of it. So yeah, I think there's lots of synergies in the BAME community and in the legal profession with all the issues that Crash has raised. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, thank you. And this event as well, we're hoping, aren't we, Abby, to stream out to those at the start of their profession, so probably similar to Crash, maybe a little bit earlier law students, those that are sitting thinking about, how do I define myself as X? Do I embrace this part of my identity in my professional life? Do I bring it to the fore? There's lots of talk even at that level of personal branding. Is that part of my personal brand? You know, I'm a little mini business in whatever firm or chambers is going to employ me. Is this something that I want to push to make a unique kind of, not selling point, but position as well, perhaps, and that's okay too. And we've all seen it in people's personal kind of styles, parts of their identity, and others who perhaps kind of keep that a bit hidden back. And you know, so I think it's really interesting that there's some similarities there, but also I think in terms of some of the things that have come out there will be of great interest to that part of our community as well, and those listeners and our audience. And I just wondered, Trish, if you wanted to share anything about your kind of own experience of the profession and some of the challenges you had, some of the recent changes. I know we touched upon, you know, there has been a lot of talk about diversity. Has there been a lot of talk and then not much coming out of it, or talk within the community, with, you know, with your peers, but, you know, again, there's still not, you know, all talk, no action?
Yeah, I think, like I said, when I did qualify, I came to the profession at a completely different time to students these days and young people who are entering the profession. And the way things have changed is brilliant in that you can talk about, like you say, these aspects of yourself that make you an individual and a human being. But that wasn't part of the way I was brought up in the profession. And so, you know, I apart from being BAME myself, but, you know, I'm a Christian, you know, I'm diabetic, you know, I've got all the protected characteristics almost, you know, but that I was always acutely aware that I shouldn't want to raise those things about myself for wanting to seek a sub-story or vulnerability or something like that, because I had to always prove, as we all do, to get there on merit. And I, in a way, and I do think certainly in the BAME community, there's certainly a perception, and this is culturally as well, that because we're kind of taught from a young age, and I think that for women as well as men from the BAME community, that we have to work harder to be able to get our foot in the door. You know, we won't be judged equally to, you know, your average British student. You know, we need to do even more. That you are going to keep back all those things that don't make you individual and potentially vulnerable. You've got to be superhuman and do more hours and do more law and single-handedly save the world, you know, and all the rest of it to be able to crack into the profession. I think that is really changing, and for the better. And now we want to know about what's individual about people, and to what we want them to bring their whole self. And you mentioned like a unique selling point, and I really think that is such a positive take on it all now, because we aren't robots. Yes, we have to churn out the advice and the hours and go to court and all the rest of it. But actually, a client doesn't want to speak to a robot. They want to speak to an individual that they can empathise with. And if you've got something that, allows you to empathise and to provide a better service to your client because you share a protected characteristic, or you understand the culture that they're from and all the rest of it, use it, because that is such a brilliant way to actually increase the diversity within our profession and actually make things better for our clients, because ultimately that's what we're here to do. So I fear I may not have answered your question, but I do think things have changed and for the better, and what I would say to young people thinking about entering the profession now, and even people like myself who've been around for a while, talk about your experiences and your individuality, because actually that's what makes you much more interesting as a person and as a lawyer.
Absolutely. And whenever we're asked to join, and Crash, I know you will be very soon asked to join things like career fairs or speak about your career to date, and Addy too, you will definitely be asked, because it's those interesting stories. If you've been involved in setting up other organisations or groups or networks, that's people want to know, why have you done that alongside the slog at work in the office, and when you do that, those stories that you think are maybe personal, maybe not of interest, might show you in a different light than you think you should be presenting yourself in. Actually, they're the ones that really engage, and people think a lot more highly of you because you've had to not necessarily overcome, but kind of step up to certain issues or challenges, or deal with things in a very professional way when you may not have been treated very professionally, and still come out shining. And I think that's really an important thing, and that's part of what we're doing here, I hope.
Very much so. May I give you an example, actually, Emma? When I was at law school, and I was part of a group that was supporting BAME students to crack on in the profession, get work experience and all the rest of it. And I remember it's at Store Street in London. I remember attending this lecture theatre, and the ethos was that BAME individuals would find it harder to get into commercial firms. It was more regarded that legal aid and high street firms were more willing to take us than commercial. And the advice was that if you want to crack into commercial, I will never forget this because it was such bad advice, but it was advice at the time. And they effectively said, if you want to go and work in a commercial firm in London, go and sit in a coffee shop outside that firm, and then just watch the people going into the building. When you work out which ones are the lawyers, try and work out what label they're wearing. So if when you apply and you're lucky enough to get an interview, make sure you're wearing the same label so that you've got a chance of getting in. And to this day, I remember hearing it thinking, what, and never, ever followed it through. I went to all my interviews in my Primani finest, and I got the job no matter what because of that. But it just showed, that was a group that was set up by BAME individual, BAME tutors and all the rest of it. But that was the society we lived in at the time, and so in some respects that was helpful. But I was just the kind of person that went, if that's what I have to do, if I have to wear extortionately expensive clothes that I don't want, then I'm not working there, But and I do think for the BAME community in particular, culturally, I think we often suffer a lack of confidence, just inherently. The students that I meet through the work that I do with CDLS as chair of the BAME committee, I can see that there's a real passion for the law, but there is a lack of confidence and understanding if they can progress in the same way as maybe British born students that don't appear as BAME. And so what I really think the profession is still struggling with is understanding that, and then putting in place mentoring schemes from university level, law school level, up to employed, up to partner level, actually, because people are getting there eventually, but they're going above and beyond and probably killing themselves a bit, in terms of trying to do more than they need to, and not realizing that they can seek support. When you have that mentoring environment, and the ability to say, look, I want to progress, but I don't want to work every hour under the sun, I like my weekends or whatever it might be, you'll get that support and then understand how to get there on your own terms and in a way that you're comfortable with and happy to undertake. I think that's been very missing in our profession for a long time, and that as some of the Law Society ethnic minority team have said to me, that BAME is almost the elephant in the room. you know, because actually a lot of people are embarrassed about, and I'm sure this in, you know, there are crossovers with the LGBT community, but sort of embarrassed about their lack of knowledge. And therefore, rather than say, well, how are you feeling? Or was there a religious ceremony today? Did that impact on you? You know, or are you fasting at the moment? Whatever the issue might be, they'd rather say nothing because they don't want to put their foot in it. And so what that means is they completely ignore what makes that individual unique and won't go there, so much so that they feel less supported and they can't bring their whole self to work again. So it just is self-perpetuating. So, you know, I know we've covered the ground already, but I think mentoring is absolutely critical in making sure that BAME individuals feel that they can have an equal role in our profession generally.
Thank you.
I was going to say, well, there are just so many things that Trish has just said that I thought were really, really important points that I wanted to kind of underline. But I hate that feeling of like having to like manage other people's awkwardness. Like it just can be so exhausting. And I think there's clearly like a really happy medium, isn't there, between being like sort of inappropriately intrusive about someone's personal identity that's not appropriate, that's not professional, versus just being like just not wanting to have anything to do with it. And some people think that in order to avoid the problem on this side of one extreme, they can just rush to the other extreme, but that's also a problem, and it also creates issues if you have a minority background or whatever. I think some people have this idea that like they don't want to talk about the fact that we live in an unequal society, because the only way we're ever going to have equality is if we all collectively agree never to talk about inequality and just pretend that it doesn't exist, and then it will evaporate. And obviously that's ridiculous. And the only way that we can create more equal society is by acknowledging and understanding and working together to confront and address inequalities. I was going to say, I think there can sometimes be I think it's good that we're moving away from that reticence, right? And this idea that people need to like keep their identities in a closet or just never talk about anything that makes them different in the workplace. And some people do internalize that idea and then feel like they can't talk about themselves on applications, even if they want to. And my practical advice for people would be to always make sure you have like someone with a good eye looking over application forms. And I remember I did this for someone recently who was like a hugely talented person, but amongst many other things, they spoke 2 languages other than English, like both one fluently, like one to like quite a high standard, and they were both like languages that like you can imagine her like using in her career. She was like, oh, I just don't know if it's relevant, or if it just looks like, you know, like it's special status, or like trying to plead for favor. And it's like, well, there's some really important skill that you have. It's obviously relevant, and obviously, you know, sets you apart, could be useful, very good thing to include on an application form. But I think because we all internalize that kind of like reticence or sort of senses of discomfort around what makes us different. And a good way to guard against that is by like having someone who's got a good eye, who you trust, to look over these forms and tell you when you're underselling yourself, or and then it's your decision. Like I don't believe there should ever be a pressure for people to disclose or rely on, you know, personal aspects of their identity. And it can go too far the other way, where you create the expectation on, you know, the one LGBT person in your chambers to do all the diversity work or loads of outreach, or expect them to be really visible when perhaps they're not comfortable being visible, and that's not the type of person they are. So it has to come from the individual. Like, what do you feel comfortable in yourself?
I definitely feel that I definitely agree that a lot of it is to do with the confidence, like you say, about, you know, the girl who didn't want to say that she spoke 2 languages. I think a lot of time for sort of BAME individuals is that almost you feel like you've just got a seat at the table, but that seat can be very easily taken away. And so I think on top of that, there's that extra layer of being women. So you're actively discouraged from any kind of whistleblowing, whether it be positive or not. And I think, like you say, that sort of mentorship, and actually there, and particularly I found on the Wales and Chester circuit, there's such a wealth of women who are so interested and invested in helping younger women, but it's just finding them and being able to let them speak and help those who are coming into the profession as well.
I mean, it was always a shock to me. I had my daughter 4 years ago, and all my friends that lived in a very different, faraway place, not in my profession, although I'm kind of always on the margins of the law anyway, not in a criminal way. It always was a shock to me at the time when I had her, then reaching out to people who were mothers, and even like that's quite a huge group. There's lots and lots of mothers, lots of lawyers who are mothers, so that's a really easy group to suddenly have a conversation with, and they're very specific ones. And those that have had recently newborn babies, the conversation there will be very different to those that have got teenagers, and you suddenly kind of think, oh, I can't really talk to you because you can't remember, and it's all you're gooey-eyed, and it's not gooey-eye stuff, it's crazy. And so those lived experiences are slightly different, depending on age. There's another variant that comes in, or they may be friends around you who can't have children, and so you wouldn't go to, and so it's all really, and it's difficult. And so then if you're suddenly trying to kind of compress this amount of, the people around you, the type of, the size of the community that you have access to have these conversations, like you're saying, Trish, how are you? How was Diwali for you? How's fasting? How Crash? That you had a march recently. How did that go for you? What are you feeling like afterwards? I don't, anything that someone's been involved in and asking them, then it suddenly starts to dwindle, that number, doesn't it? So and that's not something that we can fix here in this event. But what I do hope is that anyone who may be feeling that they can identify with any of you in the conversation, that they might be able to then have the confidence to come forward and find those groups, or if they start in the workplace, then to reach out and start to kind of talk between them as well. And I think, once you start to build those bonds, I can imagine that's where it all starts anyway, not just within the firm, but more widely. I mean, Trish, you set up the BAME subcommittee, probably about 2 years ago now.
2 years ago, yeah.
Before the pandemic. Obviously, we've all gone online. That in some ways brought us closer together, in others has made us feel more isolated. And it's easy to forget and ignore, I think, perhaps some of the challenges. How's it been? Have you found new members have come forwards? Some of the issues that you've been talking about, and of course we had the George Floyd death as well.
Yes, so. Yeah. I think it's like anything with, lockdown originally was so unique and unusual, wasn't it? We had a captive audience to start with. We knew everyone was going to be by their desk at a certain time. So, in the first sort of 6 to 12 months, we had very good attendance at events. And they were all events around, like you say, topical things like the George Floyd murder. And we did one on the imposter syndrome. And they were well attended because people were feeling vulnerable. Our members were feeling that issue that Adriana's talked about, in that, this could all go in a minute. And I think our members very much felt that, because I think the stats were that, paralegals, trainees, that were furloughed tended to be, there was a high proportion of that number that were BAME. And so it really did impact on their I was going to say they made them more vulnerable to thinking they could still carry on in the profession. And I think now we're trying to sort of morph back into in-person meeting. We want to see people again. We want to get everyone around a table. We're struggling with that at the moment, actually. We're struggling to get people to sign up to events and to want to come in person. And there's obviously lots of reasons for that, but including COVID. But I suspect that's because a lot of our members may not be here anymore, and they may have moved city, they might have gone somewhere else where it's a bit more diverse and there's more opportunities and all the rest of it. And, I'll only really know once I have an in-person event, and I can see how much that's affected our membership in Wales, and Cardiff and the broader district. Because I think, you know, if what I would hate is that lockdown experiences or just general concern about profession will put people off practicing here in Wales forever. Because things have changed. You know, I was a student, I didn't do law when I was studying in Wales, but, you know, again, I'll give you some historic advice that I got, but from trainees that were at Morgan Cole, which is now Blake Morgan, told me, right, if you want to be in law, don't train in Wales, come to Wales when you want to retire, because the profession was so much smaller then, it really was. You know, I graduated in the year 2000, so, you know, it was a long time ago. But they told me to go and train in London, which I did. You know, I do litigation, so the court system and all of that. But I was so relieved when I left legal aid, left London and came to a commercial firm in Wales, that they were totally wrong, you know, completely wrong. The profession had moved on leaps and bounds, and there were so many more chambers here than, you know, they led me to believe, and all the rest of it. So things, you know, and that changed in a sort of 7-year period. I mean, you know, it's not very long really, but that was 7 years where that massively changed. And so if our members have left and they've gone to other cities, and they probably are still within the law, I would hope that, you know, that's the one thing, it takes a long time, doesn't it, to study and get your qualifications. You're not going to give that up easily. But they don't feel that Wales is completely cut off to them, because things are changing, and it's changing through groups like this, and, you know, partners in particular, you know, in certain firms being very cognizant of that they need to move a bit more with the times. But, you know, recruitment is changing, I think, and recruitment practices are changing. I don't profess to have any detailed knowledge about that, but, you know, I don't think now, even the students sometimes do feel it, but I don't think if you have a slightly different sounding name, that automatically is going to put somebody off interviewing you. I don't think that's likely to happen. What I still think could happen is if you dress differently or you wear different clothing for very good reason, religious reasons or otherwise. Not saying that wouldn't get you the interview, but I think that would make people fearful of working with you. And that's all on the firm. That's not on that individual. That, you know, that shouldn't put you off going for the interview at all. But I think there is still that sort of ignorance plus fear of putting your foot in it, that there's a sort of implicit sort of feeling that we wouldn't understand each other, and that's completely wrong. But you know, recruitment practices are changing, and in terms of contextual stuff, and, you know, if you want to, you know, wear something different, you can, and, you know, you might be asked about it. It could be a discriminatory issue, but at the same time it could be like, well, how can you tell us how we could support you if, you know, a client, for example, raised that issue, you know, what would you like us, how would you think we should deal with that? And I think that's a great way of fully making an applicant feel, yeah, if I came and worked here, I might actually be understood and they might support me, and all the rest of it. I think we're so British sometimes that we fear all those, and I say that I you know, born in this country, always, you know, British through and through, but, you know, I think that's can be in our downfall sometimes, is that we're not as open about things as we could be at that recruitment level, that may make people feel that maybe Wales is a bit more closed off than it truly is, you know, because I'm sure all of us working in Wales, and Crash would probably say this as well, if you meet people face to face, people are lovely in Wales. You know, I certainly, growing up in the south of England, people are really friendly, they're happy to talk to you, they want to know about you. Why don't we do that also in our recruitment as well? You know, I think that's a key thing, I think, for the future.
I think on recruitment, because, yeah, I think the statistics show there are still, like, quite serious issues. I remember the recent ones from pupillage applications include a statistic that if you're a BAME person applying for pupillage, even if you have the same academic grades as a white applicant, you're half as likely to get an offer, which is, like, quite a shocking statistic. And I think there's definitely a long way to go for the Welsh bar to become racially diverse, or even you know, vaguely representative of communities here in Wales. But one of the things that I think about is that there's a lot of research that says that it's about the importance of diverse panels, like interview panels.
Yes.
And, you know, the sort of the unconscious bias, people are likely to recruit people that have similar life stories or similar backgrounds to themselves, and that can lead to undiverse organisations continuing to be undiverse. So I think that's like a really practical thing that organisations perhaps could pay more attention to than they do. Like, how are they ensuring their interview panels are diverse, and that might even potentially include, and lots of organisations, definitely like in other spheres, would do this, like having external people on interview panels sometimes. Like, there's no reason why, there's no rule why everyone has to be working at your organisation.
Totally.
One thing that you mentioned, Trish, is, you know, about getting people in and getting different voices in to talk about diversity and some of the experiences you had. Do you think that sort of one of the issues as well is that, you know, there are a lot of senior barristers and legal professionals, particularly on a small circuit in Wales, that might be nervous to ask questions about sort of BAME communities, and nervous to ask about different religions or identities, and how do we sort of bridge that gap between them being nervous and wanting to know the information?
Totally. I think they have to remember, I imagine you know, the barrister end of the profession, you feel this more than solicitors, but because we come to you as the experts when we instruct you on cases, that, you know, you've just got to have this innate confidence, don't you, and present, you know, arguments that might be balmy, you know, for your client or whatever. And I think what comes with that is a sort of ethos of don't ever let anyone know you don't know what you're asking about, almost, you know. And I'd say that it's sort of, in some respects, we're quite fortunate at the solicitor end, because we deal with the clients more and we develop the rapport. You know, we often are a lot more vulnerable with them as a result, you know, and we'll talk about, you know, what were you doing last weekend, were you at the football, or how old's your children, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I just think it's just the way that we get more time with our clients. But I think in this context, you just got to remember you're a human being at the end of the day, you know. And you know, if you ask someone, a client or a solicitor or whoever you're working with, you know, well, how about that? I'm not too sure about it. Diwali's just happened recently. My son was learning about it at school, and I don't fully understand Diwali, but you know, I've got Hindu friends, and I will ask them and say, I know that the candles are involved and there's light, but tell me a bit more about it, you know. And they would love it. They would absolutely love it, because you're showing interest in a really positive way. It's not because you're being intrusive to be able to find out something to use against them. You know, when I came into the profession, that might have been how I would have perceived it, I have to say, at that time, because I was trying to pretend I wasn't anything different to anybody else. But if someone asked me about religion, health, or anything, I wouldn't have wanted to say, because I would have thought you're trying to find a reason to make me stand out. It's different. We're in a different world now, and actually we want to know what makes you individual. So I think, you know, just leave the professional, you know, veneer off a little. Just remember you're a human being at the end of the day, and the more you know, the more you can pass on to others, you know. And ultimately, because I think the way that you guys practice, in the sense that you don't always have the same level of contact with the clients that, you know, your instructing solicitors might, it will make you much more rounded, because then I know whenever I'm stuck outside a courtroom and, you know, judges taking a long time to deal with all the cases, those interesting conversations that counsel has with, you know, the client, and say, oh, the last case I had, you know, this was my client, and, you know, he was, you know, of this ethnicity or this gender, or, you know, and all these kinds of things. And those are just what brings you together, makes you more interesting, makes that client want to trust you more. So I think if you concentrate on that, then I think, you know, it will hopefully get rid of that reticence in terms of not asking.
It's funny, isn't it? Because that's almost where we're pitching the sector in a different way anyway, that you look at recruitment adverts and how the skills, the human skills, I don't like the word soft skills, the human skills that people have, we all have, should have, in different degrees. And they include empathy and interest and a kind of a passion for learning and developing ourselves, and all the things we're kind of flaunting and perhaps our LinkedIn profile. And actually, you know, that softens the legal profession in a way, but I don't think it's a danger to the type of work that you do. And no lawyer is selling the law anymore. They're selling, you know, the solving a problem. And that's what counsel would do, and solicitors would do, paralegals, silex, will all do that. And so when you're problem solving, you're trying to work out what is particularly relevant to this individual. So you have to kind of understand them and then build that rapport. I think it is the same with counsel. counsel to a different degree. Obviously they want, solicitors may want you to come in as a white knight and say the things they just can't say or don't want to say or can't get across, and that's the beauty of having counsel on your side. And you have less time with the solicitor. But at the bar, collegiately, chambers were always those things where you could turn, they're a family. Having worked in the chambers, I've always very much felt that people take things very personally. But in a way, on the flip side, then it's because it's such a strong family feeling unit, and so, for example, when somebody leaves, that's felt incredibly hard, in a hard way, even if it's because of just location or what have you. It's nothing personal, and I think that so. Sometimes people are quite happy to share a lot, and then there's that feeling of, well, if they go and I've given too much of myself away and I'm supposed to be this solid kind of confident champion, and even in chambers, I'm battling against my peers to get that piece of work, and it is a really difficult environment, I think, to and how that will change over the next few years. I like to think that perhaps it will be a bit different. I think this way of communicating with each other has softened us. I think it's, in the physical sense, it's brought everybody into our own homes. So we've seen the backgrounds that we have, the families. We might feel that we're dressing differently on Zoom calls. So all these things have started to open us up to each other. So you would hope that that gives people more confidence then to ask that next question. So I can see maybe something on your wall. I didn't know you were this. I'm this too. Let's have a conversation about it. We've just mentioned being Christians. I think Crash, you are as well. And there's other things that's not something that may necessarily hold me back in my profession, but it's not something that I may necessarily talk about either, because it's difficult, and people view it in different ways. So yeah, I think that it's going to be tougher at the bar for sure, but certainly by having these conversations it's easier, and maybe by being the person that asks everybody else to get that kind of culture going. But there is a fine line, I suppose, between being nosy and being genuinely interested for a greater cause. And that's where kind of finding that line, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Like, I think it's funny though, because I think people just overthink it. And people really get worked up in their heads about what they can and can't say, and it's not like, I think in theory, as lawyers, you're constantly dealing with like how to communicate sensitively with people, like how to read signals about what someone's happy to talk about and what they aren't, like what might upset somebody, what wouldn't. Like, we all have experience in this, and it should be, I would hope, more than sufficient to be able to like know when you might or might not be crossing a line with a colleague. But at the end of the day, I think people can see what your intention was, like if they're on the receiving end. Like, I know the difference between someone who's making a comment that there is perhaps a question that I'm not going to answer, and I'll just tell them I'm not going to answer it, but it's coming from like a genuine place of interest, rather than someone who's asking a question because, for example, they've got like a bit of an issue with you. They're looking for a bone to pick, or they've got like a sort of like unhealthy curiosity about you. Like, it feels very different being on the receiving end of it. But we make mistakes in our interactions with colleagues and friends. Like, that's fine. Like, and I think especially if you're able to kind of apologize and learn from your mistakes. Again, it's also just not the end of the world then if you do. So I think people can just relax about all of that.
I think Crash is totally right, and I practice quality law, and so I do in the education space. And I had a classic example. I had the transgender training, terminology training, literally the day before. Then had a client ring me up asking advice about a student dispute, and they mentioned the name Alex, and I just happened to say, is Alex a lady or a girl or a boy? And they went, neither, it's non-binary. And then after that, and I thought, right, I've had my training, I'm education lawyer, equality person, I'm going to get this right. And I kept tripping over myself, saying his, her, kept saying, no, I should be saying there, and, all of that. And the client totally understood. They were completely, and thankfully I wasn't talking actually to the individual, but, I had that exact thing that you're talking about, Crash. I overthought it and just couldn't relax into the conversation when I just need to extract the legal points of the case out, and it was tripping over myself. But then I've learned learned from that going forwards, you know. So when I had similar training again, I did ask someone, you know, what if you're not sure, you know, of somebody's personal pronoun, what's the best thing to say? And I was told, you know, in my old firm, say there, you know, and if they don't like that, then they will correct you. And I thought, okay, fine, you know, different rule of thumb. I see Crash doesn't necessarily agree, but you know, it sometimes, you, like you say, you need to make the mistake to make you more conscious of it and then relax about it, because actually you're not coming from a, you know, a horrible place with it. You're just trying to make sure that you respect somebody's rights, you know, to be referred to as they wish. But yeah, I agree, we need to relax a bit.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think yeah, gender neutral language can be your friend, definitely, in some situations. And then I think yeah, when it comes to pronouns, I think like you said, you can always just politely ask people, how would you like to be referred back to, like what pronouns do you use? I think that's a more common question to ask these days. But I can appreciate, yeah, if you're somebody who's kind of never thought about asking a question like that, like you might think, am I allowed to ask that? So yeah, I think training can be really useful for those kinds of issues.
And that's true as well. I'm going to kind of do shout out, I suppose, on your behalf to employers and to members of the bar who make the decisions as to who joins chambers, because those groups will be just as helpful for them in their understanding the kind of people that they're seeing and that they want to attract as well. It's one thing to say we want to be a more diverse bar, but do you understand what that means and the kind of people that you are you creating that space? Or are you bringing kind of 5 white 50-year-old men to a panel to say, come and work with us? And
represent, yeah, totally. And I think another thing to be conscious, the roots to the legal profession are expanding all the time, and with the SQE and Silex and all the other, you know, when I came in, it was law degree or a non-law degree and conversion course, that was it, you know. Now there's so many more opportunities, degree apprenticeships, legal apprenticeships, all the rest of it. I really hope that will automatically mean there's a broader pool of talent to recruit from, because I think some of the firms, certainly that I've been in contact with in Wales, kind of regard it as it's almost a chicken and egg thing. They think, well, we can't improve our demographic makeup because we haven't got the applicants, and it's not our fault. They're just not applying to us. When they're not working out what is it that you're presenting in your predominantly white, you know, sort of makeup of workforce that could make you appear more attractive, you know, what and like you say, we don't necessarily want to make the one person who might be in that firm that doesn't identify to be the poster person for that. But you know, there are lots of things that you can do to show how you're truly inclusive and you want to broaden the numbers of applications, and actually recruitment, VAC schemes and work experience is absolutely a brilliant, easy win for most law firms and chambers, because I know chambers do many pupilages, because I think half the people, so in my current firm that we recruit trainee level, have been through us, you know, through work experience or VAC scheme in some degree, and it's because they've come in and they've shone for whatever reason, regardless of ethnicity, background, or anything like that. It's just they had a shot, you know. And I think through lockdown, those opportunities really dried up. You know, I do think a lot of our members might have left and gone and worked in other cities, but those work experience things just dried up because there was a fear that we can't sort of supervise people remotely. But we need to start those again. We're all going to, or certainly, you know, a lot of law firms are still going to be doing hybrid working for some time. We need to get better at that, because that's just another thing that can level the playing field, allow people in and give them that ability to shine and work out where their place is within the profession. So, you know, I do hope that as we're coming out of lockdown, that those sorts of schemes will start up again.
I think one thing that you said that was really interesting, and I think you're right, is that, so I think that it can be very fair for people who are applying for pupillage now, and I think that there are lots of panels that take it very seriously, even if they are predominantly white. But I also think that actually a lot of the differences between BAME people and white people who are applying start way before they even think about becoming lawyers. You know, it starts when they're children, what schools they go to, and all this lead up to actually finally deciding if you want want to join the bar or the legal profession. I know that Big Park Place has recently made a commitment to, I think it's 10,000 black interns is a scheme that's been going on.
Yes.
I absolutely think that lots of chambers could get involved with things like that, because it does start, this sort of inequality starts way before you even reach law school. I absolutely agree with that.
No, totally. And I think it's, you know, it, like you say, we're not all starting at the same level, even if you're in the profession or not. And again, I came into the profession at a time when the way people thought and recruitment panels thought very differently. You know, I'll throw in another story, but I qualified, I did my studies at Swansea University, and when I was part of that BAME group, one of the person who was mentoring me wondered why I hadn't got a training contract, and then she saw Swansea on my CV, went, oh, you went there. And I just, again, you know, I was like, I don't know, red rectable, this, I obviously was destined to be a lawyer. I went, if somebody won't take me because I went to Swansea University, then I do not want to work with them, you know. But it does give that sort of impression it's going to be much tougher for you. So are you sure you're up for it? Are you up for the fight almost? You know, and when we're all starting out and debt and things like that, you don't necessarily need that as an extra layer on trying to get into this profession, you know. And so I think because things have moved, and in terms of solicitor and other ends of the profession, I'm hoping that the bar will be moving much further away from Oxbridge, you know, Red Brick University, you know, single-handedly saving the world in every internship that you could ever come across internationally, you know, that actually we want individuals. One of the best barristers I've ever come across was had a West Indian background, and I forget his name, but one thing, when he was before me, he wasn't representing a client of mine. I was advising the panel and he was representing the registrant. But the thing that disappointed me when he did his advocacy is that he covered up his accent. No, not covered it, but he sounded more like the average barrister you would ever see. And I wondered if he felt compelled to do that, or that was naturally him. I never asked him, but that was something I really thought. I thought, have you made that conscious decision to hide your accent? Because the way he said things and what he said was no different, and in fact was even more eloquent actually than your average barrister in those sorts of environments. But that sort of made me feel a little bit sad. I thought, you know, he's great, he's here, he's doing his work, but I hoped that he didn't feel that pressure to have to change something about himself to progress.
That's interesting actually, because I think actually thinking back now, some of the best speakers that I've ever listened to have been people with either really thick accents or have, you know, come from lower economic backgrounds. When we were at university, we had a speaker come in and actually talk about the April Jones murder, and he worked with the police, and he had a really strong Llanelli accent, and he was just outstanding, you know, like one of those speakers that you really remember for a long time. So yeah, it is sad if people feel that they need to cover that up.
Yeah.
I don't know whether Crash had the same experience as I did. Certainly going to sort of in training weekends and things like that were held in London, there was definitely an anti-Welsh you know, sort of vibe going on, and I don't think I sound particularly Welsh, so, you know, people say, oh, where are you from? Oh, I'm doing the BPTC in Cardiff. Oh, you know, so it is a shame that it goes on, but it is definitely something that, you know, is happening.
Yeah, it's there's kind of a lot going on, a lot to absorb, and it can seem very overwhelming, and I suppose you've given some really strong points and observations about what other professionals might be able to do, and obviously as individuals, and also employers and heads of chambers. Is there anything else, because I'm very aware of time, is there anything else that you think could be done, or where people could turn to, and what as a profession perhaps we could do tomorrow if we woke up and went into the office? Any kind of points or tips from any of you? Thank you.
I think, I know I've mentioned it already, but mentoring, I think, is such an important thing, and it can come out in different ways. Coaching could be another way of saying it, but I think if you start off in the mentoring way first, you know, that allows all employees, not just BAME, not just anyone who identifies with a protected characteristic, but has someone they can go to that they can talk about themselves with and their career or their concerns or whatever, will just infinitely improve everybody's working life. Because we work long hours, no matter, you know, even in lockdown, it's replicating exactly the same way. And actually there's less opportunity to bump into people, you know, in the coffee room like there was before. And you need to be more proactive now about it. And, you know, if you can start those sorts of programs, even if it's in an informal way, can lead to really brilliant things like reverse mentoring and, you know, other programs and events and whatever. And I kind of think when you see that being done from the top down as well, you know, senior partners, managing partners taking the time to do that, which you might have done in person, but maybe less inclined to do remotely. If you can do that, you'll just infinitely improve the sort of ethos and culture at the firm, so that anyone is much more likely to feel empowered, you know, if they've got any concerns about anything that they want to raise. So yeah, that's my parting shot.
Thank you. And I suppose as well, that's something you need to be talking about, how you're trying to achieve your diversity and equality commitment. Of course, put that on your website. It's not something necessarily to peacock about, but in a very factual way. And then
totally.
Absolutely, thank you. Crash, is there anything else you wanted to, or you'd like to add in, or something that I haven't covered that you wanted to add?
No, I think it's a practical thing. I agree with the point about mentoring. I think that's so important to challenging inequality and access to the legal profession. I think the practical suggestion about diversifying recruitment panels or pupillage panels is important. And then I think sort of as a more general thing, I would say just to encourage people to be open to learning more about inequality and injustice in our society, you know, recognizing that we don't have all the answers, and actually a lot of facts about the state of things are kind of kept from us, like you have to search them out. To listen and to learn from other people's experiences. I think on trans issues, the two things I recommend is if people want to read something, they should read The Transgender Issue by Sean Fay, which came out this year. And if people want to watch something, people should watch the documentary Disclosure on Netflix, which is about treatment of trans people in film and TV. I think that there's no replacement really for trying to understand these issues a bit more, and you can go off and do that if you're so desiring.
Thank you. And I'll throw something in that I learned by speaking to the head of diversity and inclusion at Thomson Reuters, and he said that if you're going to have conversations about your diverse groups, and whether that's kind of motherhood or gender or ethnicity or LGBTQ, whatever that is, don't feel that you just invite those members who identify within those groups. And if somebody says, no, I'm a man, I'm not a mother, I don't need to come to this group about, you know, mothers, of course you should, because you're a son, you had a mother, you may marry somebody and become a mother, you may adopt, all these different things. You're still part of a, you can't siphon yourself off as, oh, well, that doesn't affect me. We're all part of the same community where we bump up against each other. And, you know, it doesn't have to be something that is going to be practical in your life, but of course in the workspace, it will impact you how we may involve ourselves with one group or another, or the kind of decisions that we make about annual leave or pay or paternity, etc. And it just made such good sense, and I thought it was something that I would throw in there as well. So to make sure that you're not just inviting everybody, but also explaining to them why they should join the conversation. Addie, is there anything else you'd like to kind of comment on just towards the end?
I've got no comments on anything, but I just really want to say thank you so much to both of you for joining us this evening. I know I've learned a lot, so I'm hoping that lots of other people have heard something that might spike their interest. And thank you very much.
No worries.